It's just interesting that in this week's parasha, the Torah says, "Es hanefesh asher osu b'charon." Avram Avinu, Rashi says, was Megayer. He was Megayer people, and to bring them under the Kachas Kanfei Ashchina to be with Avram Avinu. It's interesting that in the Tosfos al HaTorah, and it's also brought in the Ksavim from the Goyim, that Osu is a hard word. It should have said Asa Nefesh, Asher Kirev, Asher Liket, Asher Kibates. What's Asher Osu? So it's brought in the Tosfos al HaTorah. Osu is Meloshin, he made them. Avram Avinu made people, May Sefer Yitzira, just like a Golem of Prague. He was Osu, he made people B'charon. So the question is, I understand if he was Megayer and he was Makar of people, but what was the necessity to use these special powers of making people Asher Osu B'charon, and you should make them from Sefer Yitzira? Why was it necessary if it would be Makarev and to enlighten people into the koyach of the Eibishter? We could understand. But what was this need of Asher Osu B'charon? I think maybe the reason is when you learn Torah, Rabbi Kivega writes in a tshuva, the Iker Torah is to be able to give over the Torah to others. Kivega says that's why Ksiva is like Dibur. Even though you only make a bracha on Dibur Shel Torah, not Hirur, but on Ksiva you also make a bracha. So Rabbi Kivega says one reason is because Ksiva is Kedibur. The other reason is because Torah needs Dibur because it has to be accessible to others. Your Torah is a lower rung Torah if it's not a Torah that's expressed to others. Avram Avinu was loy Torah. He needed others to hear it, even if he had to come on to making people from Sefer Yitzira. That enhanced his Torah because it was a Torah that was expressed to others. The Torah that's Megan Umatzel is the word Torah. Torah is Meloshin Hayroah. Hayroah by definition needs two parties. It needs someone saying the Torah and someone listening. It's not only to the benefit that there's listeners, for the listeners. It's a benefit for the person saying the Torah. If he knows there are people listening to the Torah, then it enhances, it's ma'ala, it raises up the Torah to another level. Maybe that's the pshat that Avram Avinu even had to come on to the Nefesh Asher Osu B'charon. He created a Torah that he was able to express to others. So what a gewaldige Kiddush Hashem, we come together, not only learning Sugyas HaChamuras B'Shas. If Shlomo Gadison called me, I said, I could say a shir on Bishul, I could say a shir on Grama. He said, no, he wants a shir on Zoyra, one of the Sugyas Chamuras, these Chalukim and Shas. Ashreinu Matoiv Chalkeinu, B'schus HaTorah, B'schus of the Yigia, and B'schus of the Bittul, the negation of our time and giving of ourselves to learn this Torah. We should be Seichet, Achtoi, V'chesed, Psuris Toivis, Yeshuas V'nechamas. So we'll just say over, Shailet, I just got to listen to some of the Hachonah shir, so it's really almost redundant to a lot of the Shailets that we're going to speak about. I'll just preface it before we start. It was mentioned the Yerushalmi, and we're going to get to it. I had a few years ago, someone in the shul asked me, he had a cold air humidifier, not a hot air humidifier, a cold air humidifier, which the fan blows out and makes a mist. He needed it in the house. Someone needed a humidifier. Was he allowed to add water on Shabbos? No lights go on. Could he add water into the humidifier on Shabbos? At first, I thought it's very innocuous. What would be a problem of adding it? There's no heating. It's putting water in front of a fan, which blows out and turns it into a mist, which really would be a contemporary question of this Yerushalmi that we're going to go through today and learn up this Yerushalmi. So I just wanted to say that to contemporize the question of this sugya that we're going to learn. So we said that the Gemara in Shabbos, Mesechtes Shabbos Dafayin Gimel Amid Beis, the Gemara says Hazoyre, hainu boirer, hainu meraket. We know there's a malach of Zaira, which is when you throw the wheat, the kernels up together with the chaff, the cover, and the wind, the cover of the kernels, and the wind blows it to the side. That's a malacha of Zaira. The Gemara seems to be asking, Hainu Zaira, Hainu Baira. Because what are you doing in essence when you do Zaira? You're taking off the chaff, which is the psilis, which is what you don't need, and you're trying to retain the kernel, which is with it. Then the Gemara says, so that's Hainu Meraket. Meraket was also when they would thrash the wheat and they would bang on it in order for it to separate the part of the kernel from the stalk and from the kernel, from the chaff. So the Gemara says, Abai v'Ravad Amar Travayu Kol Milsa Dahi b'Mishkan Afagav Dekedadam Yalei Law Choshev Law. That means there is a distinction not in mitzias of the malacha. There's a mitzias how it was done in the Mishkan, and therefore there are certain ways, certain kulas that are, if it's called Zaira, if it's called Bayra, if it's called Meraket. But in essence, all three malachas in the Mishkan were synonymous, and therefore they would be one and of the same. So that means the etzem cheftza, the definition of the malacha of Zaira and Bayrer, would be psoiles mitoich oichel. If you're separating what you don't need from what you do need, that really defines the malacha, both of Zaira and of Bayrer. The Mogen Avram in Cynamon, Tov Mem Vav Sif Cotton Base, tells us that you have to, we hold like the Chachamim, that on Pesach you're not allowed to have chametz. And even though the ideal way of tashbisu is to burn the chametz, but there's also a way of getting rid of the chametz, and it's the lashon of the Gemara in Masechtas Psachim. Zoira, you're allowed zoira beruach. You throw the chametz out the window and you winnow it. You spread it out. So therefore, you're getting rid of the chametz, and in that way, you're also makayim and mitzvahs tashbisu. So when you can't be makayim the tashbisu through burning, there's a way of being makayim tashbisu by zoira beruach. The Mogen Avram in Siman Tov Mem Vav Sivkotten Beis on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos, when you can't be makayim the mitzvah through burning because it's Shabbos, and after you finished eating Shabbos morning, so some say that the way to get rid of the chametz is open up your window in a place where there's an Erev, and you're not in a Rishus, you're not throwing it out to a Rishus HaRabim. You could be mafazer it, you could be zoira the chametz out the window. The Mogen Avram notes, and he says, you should not do it, because that might be the Isser of Zoira in the Torah. And the Makar is the Yerushalmi, that there's a Yerushalmi which was quoted, and it's quoted by the Ramah, is that Zoira, Roikek, Beruach, if somebody spits out the window on Shabbos, and he throws water out the window on Shabbos, so then the wind will carry it or separate it. So Yochayiv Mishum Zaira b'Shabbos. And this is quoted by the Ramah, as was brought out by Shlomo Shlita, that's an Isser of Zaira. So it's an Isser of Zaira in that case. Zok the Mogen Avram. So when you throw the chametz out the window, you're being over the Isser of Zaira, and it's a malacha deraisa. So if it's a malacha deraisa, you are not allowed to do it on Erev Pesach Shechal b'Shabbos. Therefore, the Mogen Avram says that you shouldn't do it. Freikter b'Kiva in the Tshuva Siman Chav, it's l'chayra mavuya from our Gemara that we just spoke out in Masechtas Shabbos Tabayin Gimel Amid Beis, that the Isser of Zaira seems to be tied to the Isser of Bayra. So the Metzias of the Malach of Zaira is Psailis Mitoich Eichel. Now, when you take spit and spit it out the window, there's no Psailis and there's no Eichel. I would venture to say it's all Psailis. And therefore, all the wind is doing is mysticizing it, turning into a mist. Or in the case of chametz, it's separating the chametz, that it shouldn't be a chametz of kazayas. the ganze Malacha doesn't exist. Because the whole Malacha, our Gemara says, is Pseilus Mitay Reichel. And if it's Pseilus Mitay Reichel, so then there, by Chametz or by Spit, that would not apply. So it seems very clear that our Bavli does not go with that Shita Sayurushalmi. Because if there would be a halacha that would be called Zaira, that has no connection to the Malacha of Boirer and Merakit. So the Gemara on Ein Gimel Amid Beis and Shabbos and Ein Dalet Amid Aleph would not need a teretz because Lechoshev, because it's a Malacha b'Mishkan. It's completely different. Zaira is Zaira and Boirer is Boirer. Elamai, our Bavli, does not agree with the Yerushalmi. Parenthetically, we put into the Marmakamis that part of the Shita of the Yerushalmi, there is a Yerushalmi, it's a question of two Girsayas. Does the Yerushalmi change the Girs of our Gemara? And the Yerushalmi puts in Mishamer instead of Zaira. So maybe the Yerushalmi Lishita Sai would have this distinction and would agree with Rebbe Akiva Eiger. The Yerushalmi holds Zaira is a distinct malacha, not connected to Pseilus Mitaycha. Masha'enkein, the Bavli does. So since we in our Gemara do not paskin, have a different girsa, so we hold Zaira is close to Boirer, so therefore the rule of Zaira beruach or Roikek beruach or throwing the chametz out beruach would not so therefore it would be the halacha. It would not be the halacha. However, if you look in the Korban Oeda on that halacha in Yerushalmi, so therefore you look on that girsa in the Yerushalmi, he seems to change the girsa and put back in Zaira. So it would be. So then it's not 100% clear that Yerushalmi would be that halacha. V'oid fragt Rebbe Akiva Eiger from a Gemara in Baba Kama, the famous Gemara that we all learned in Yeshiva. The Gemara says if someone blows on fire on a coal and he makes a big fire and the fire goes out and is mazik, he's chayiv because of the malacha of eish. The Gemara wants to know what happens if liba v'lipsa haruach, if he's blowing and he's being assisted by the wind. So the Gemara says, you're not chayiv. Frag the Gemara, why are you not chayiv? Because the wind is doing it and you're not doing it independently by yourself. Frag the Gemara, why is that true? I see that when you Zaira, you use the wind. You throw these kernels with the chaff up into the air and the wind blows it. So the wind blows it and you are chayiv. So you see Zaira beruach misayosai is chayiv. Frag the Gemara, if Zaira beruach misayosai is chayiv, that means being assisted by the wind is called that you're doing it. So the Gemara, im kain, the same should apply by H. So the Gemara answers different to Rutzim. Maybe we'll come back after to the famous teretz of the Gemara. But the Frek Rebbe Akiva Eiger, I see from that Gemara that the malacha is what you really would do with your hands, you're chayiv. The Gemara is posing a question, if instead of using your hands or your breath to make the fire, you're being assisted by the wind. So that's called you're using the wind to do what you want. So therefore the Gemara is comparing that to Zaira. So what you're doing by Zaira, if you would do it with your hands, it would be what you would do with your hands, you'd be chayiv. What would you be chayiv if you separate the chaff from the kernels? You would be chayiv some sort of a malacha, like either you would be chayiv the malacha of Boirer Pseilus Mitay Chaychel. So you'd be pulling the chaff off the kernels. That means that would be the chiyuv. So if that would be the chiyuv, if you would do it with your hands, you'd be chayiv. So therefore, it's not the wind making it into mist, which is the isser. If Zaira would be wind changing a metzias, if you would separate spit with your hands, you wouldn't be chayiv. The metzias of the wind separating it, nature separating it, that is the malacha of Zaira. If that would be the malacha of Zaira, the comparison of the Gemara seems very, very tortured. What kind of comparison is there Zaira beruach misayosai to the Indian of liba v'lipsa ruach? So we see from the Gemara that the Isser of Zaira is Pseilus Mitay Chaychel, not that the Isser of Zaira is the wind itself The wind is just an extension of you. So there's no isser of separating spit. There's no isser of separating chametz. That's not an isser. There's a new isser, according to the Yerushalmi, of zoyre. That means using wind and wind mysticizing something. So then that doesn't stem with the Gemara. So that's question number 2 of Reb Kiva. We see from our Gemara clearly that it disagrees with the Yerushalmi. And number 3, Frekt Reb Kiva, which was quoted also by the Nishmas Adam, which will come back later possibly to the Nishmas Adam. We know there's a klal, malacha she'ena tzricha legufa is potter. How could the Magen Avram hold that if you throw chametz out the window and you make it into crumbs, it becomes yochaya, and you shouldn't do it because a malacha d'oraisa? At best, it's a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. I don't need the chametz. I don't need anything of that. I just need it out of my rishus and separated. So there's no tzricha legufa. If there's no tzricha legufa, at best, it's a derabanan. And this Yerushalmi is a gevaldik chiddush. So if you couple that together, it's very schwer for the Magen Avram to learn why it would be isser to do it on our Pesach Chal B'Shabbos. So just to chazer it over. We said that the Yerushalmi says, Zoyre on Shabbos has a component of spitting into the wind and making it into a mist. And which, according to the Yerushalmi, adding water to a cold air humidifier would be possibly very doimit to that halach. So according to Yerushalmi, according to the Magen Avram, it would be close to an Issa Daraisa as quoted by the Rambam. It's fakert from our Gemara, because our Gemara says Hainu Zaira, Hainu, and all these halachas. And number 2, the Gemara says Zaira veruach misayosai, so it's mashma that the ruach misayosai is the isser, not the Zaira itself is the isser. So it's another raya that it's pseilis mitay chaychel. And the third thing is it should be malach shein tzricha legufa, because at that point it should be malach shein tzricha. In order, it's a malach shein tzricha legufa. In order to address this, we'll start with the last kasha of Reb Kiva. And since we're talking to people who went through with such iyun Melech Shabbos, and also it's very important for the malachas, we're saying Reb Kiva is asking, it should be, and the Nishmas Adam is also very strongly asking this question. If it's a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, because I'm separating. The emes is in Masechta Shabbos and our sugya, the Rishonim all ask the kasha, every boirer of psoilis mitay chaychel. What is boirer? Boirer and zoyrer are taking the psoilis away from the oichel. If one takes the oichel away from the psoilis, you're not really over the isser. You're over the isser when you take the psoilis away from the oichel. If you take the bone off the fish, then it's boirer. If you take the pits out of the watermelon, then but if you take the watermelon off the pits, or if you take the fish off the bone, that's not bona fide boirer. So the boirer is, which is the same thing according to us, would be by zoyre. So then, fragen the Rishonim, it's always by definition a malacha she'ena tzricha leguf. Because what am I doing the malacha with? I'm taking the psoilis off the oichel. I don't need the psoilis. I just don't need the psoilis here. That should be comparable to when somebody kills a bee. When he kills the bee, it's a malach she'ena tzricha legufa. He just doesn't need the bee he doesn't want the bee to bother him. Or if there's a mace in a house, Rachmana litzlan, and you take it out, the Gemara at the beginning of Masechet Shabbos, then it's not a malacha she'tzricha legufa. I don't need the mace. I just don't need it here. If I take the psoilis off the oichel, that by definition is a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. If it's a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, so if we hold malacha she'ena tzricha legufa is potter, why are we chayiv by boirer in general? Boirer and zaira should be potter on its face. And there are few terutzim in the Rishonim, but the Baal HaMoyer and other Rishonim, and it's quoted in the Mishnah Berurah in a few places, is it's true. You're right. It's a malach she'ena tzricha legufa. But since that was a malacha in the Mishkan, so boirer and zoyre are exceptions to the rule, and they're an exception to the rule. And even though by definition it's a malacha shenetzricha legufa, over these malachas are chayiv b'malach shenetzricha legufa. Since the malacha by its very nature is a malach shenetzricha legufa, so therefore it is chayiv even though it's a malach shenetzricha legufa. Is a pelaployim. What's Kivega? Kivega says, according to the Yerushalmi, so according to the Magen Avram, it's Zaira. If it's Zaira, it's a malach shenetzricha legufa. What do you mean? Zaira is Baira. And Baira and Zaira are exceptions to the rule. So it's a malach shenetzricha legufa. If it's a malach shenetzricha legufa, what's Rabbi Kivega's kash? So I agree, Rabbi Kivega has three solid kash. One from our Gemara. So why is Reikik such a halacha? And then second thing is Frekt Rabbi Kivega. The second thing is from Zaira v'ruach misayosa. It's mashmitz a ruach misayosa. And Gimel Frekt Rabbi Kivega Moshe tzricha leguf. On that third kasha, we don't understand Rabbi Kivega. Possibility from malach shenetzricha leguf. V'hanira on all the kashas of Rabbi Kivega, and we'll understand why Rabbi Kivega asked the kashas. The truth is, Rabbi Kivega is right, obviously. And the din is Zaira is synonymous with Baira. But there's such a halacha in the Torah of Toildos. There's a halacha that there are derivatives of malacha. The metzias of the malacha in the Mishkan was Zaira beruach, which is separating the chaff from the kernel, with al yedei the ruach, which is psoilus mitay chaypa. That is Zaira. And in that essence of the malacha, which is the av malacha, Zaira is daima to Baira. But since the Torah was machadish after the Gemara, that Zaira is a distinct malacha that's used with the wind, so separating with the wind, even when it's not psalus mitay chaychel, is a subcategory, a toilda of the malacha of Zaira. And it's its own malacha, a toilda. It's similar to the av that you're using wind to separate. But it's not like the Av that it's a halacha of psalus mitay chaychel. It's a halacha of creating a new entity, a new metzius of mist or crumbs. That's also a toilda of the malacha. But the essence of the malacha is the wind, but it's a different outcome. In the Av, it's psalus mitay chaychel. In the toilda, it's not psalus mitay chaychel. It's using the wind. The Gemara in Masechtas Shabbos Tafayim Gimel Amid Beis is addressing the Av, the Hainu Zaira, Hainu Baira. So they're all the same malacha of psalus mitay chaychel. The Gemara is now mechadish that there's a new malacha of Zaira which is separating psalus mitay chaychel al yedei ruach. Once we're mechadish al yedei ruach, so now comes into play a toilda. And the toilda is the Yerushalmi. As in Yerushalmi state, that if you reikik mitay ruach, so it becomes a toilda of Zere, and in Zere, the halacha of being reikik into the air. And being reikik into the air will be a halacha of a toilda of Zere. Im Kain, parenthetic, you look in Hilchos Shabbos from Avi Ezri, Zeichat Tzadik Lebracha, Rav Shach, he says, this word, not exactly to answer Mikvega, but it's a toilda. He says the Yerushalmi is a toilda. So if the Yerushalmi is a toilda, so it's a new metzius. Im Kain, it's very good. Why Rabbi Kivega asks from malach shenetzricha leguf. Fragt Rabbi Kivega, malach shenetzricha leguf is, sagt Rabbi Kivega, I can tolerate the Yerushalmi. But that means the Yerushalmi would have to be, there's a new malacha of Zaira. There's a Zaira which is mefaza beruach. That malacha is like any Maisa malacha. It's a Maisa malacha of doing something, not being Bayer psalus mitay chaychel. Of them, sagt Rabbi Kivega, in jene toilda, wollte es gedacht sein, a malacha shetzricha leguf. Bishlema, when it's psalus mitay chaychel, so that the etzem malacha is psalus. Taking psalus away from eichel is automatically a malacha shetzricha leguf, but that's by definition. But now that you are macharish a malacha of doing something, making it in to mist, So when you're making it into mist, then you can hear that the halacha would be a halacha of making it into mist. So that would be a halacha that you need tzricha lagufa. Throwing the chametz out the window is lachshin tzricha lagufa. Eilachanami, Kivega zok that the Yerushalmi could be spitting into the wind is also lachshin tzricha lagufa. Very good. But so that would be Tom lachshin tzricha lagufa. But zok that even in the Magen Avram wants to accept it, here it would have to be lachshin tzricha lagufa. In Cain, parenthetically, would come out that a cold air humidifier would be usher even on the tzad of Reb Kvega would be lachshin tzricha lagufa. There I need the mist. I need the mist in the room. If I need the mist in the room, then that Pizur Baruach would be Mlach Shetricha Lagufa. And since it would be Mlach Shetricha Lagufa, so therefore, that's why there would be such a halach. Im Kain is Miyushav the other two kashas of Reb Kivege. What are you going to say that the Gemara says, Hainu Zaira, Hainu Bayrer? Hainu Zaira, Hainu Bayrer is the Havamin of the Gemara before we said Lechoshe B'Mishkan. Once we're machadish lechoshe b'mishkan, so we classified Zaira as its own malacha. Once we classified the Zaira as the own malacha, so then there's a place and we can honor a tolda. And once we can honor a tolda, so then the halacha would be the tolda would be the Yerushalmi. The Gemara, very good. The Gemara is asking from Zaira, from the classic case of Zaira. In the classic case of Zaira, that's the Gemara in the Sechtes Baba Kama, and the Gemara says Zaira v'ruach misayosai should be comparable to liba v'lipsa ruach. It just comes out very interesting to note that if that would be liba v'lipsa ruach, the Gemara answers in the third teretz in the Sechtes Baba Kama daf samach amar aleph that the reason by Zaira Chayiv is because it's a maleches machsheves. So Shabbos is different. The Rosh on the Gemara in Mesechtes Bava Kama, the Rosh tells us that the teretz of the Gemara is not that Grom is Chayiv b'Shabbos, is that Zaira is a metzius of the Malacha with the Ruach. So it's Bahachi Amar Rachmana. It's separating it with the Ruach. So the Ruach is part and parcel of the Malacha. So if the Ruach is part and parcel of the Malacha, you can't say that's called Ruach Misayosai. That's not called Ruach Misayosai. The Ruach is the Hefts of the Malacha. And therefore, since the Torah was makbid, separating Al Yidei Ruach, because the second you don't separate it Al Yidei Ruach, the halacha would be that what? That it would be in Tabayra, it wouldn't be Zaira. So that means the Torah is honoring the Ruach of Zaira. So therefore, that's not called Ruach Misayosai. According to the Rosh, it's Gevaldik, why there's a Tolda. There's a tolda of Pizur because the Ruach is not just happens to be part of the Malacha. The Ruach is the Metzius of the Malacha. The Metzius of the Malacha of Zaira is separating Al Yidei Ruach. Once the Ruach separation is part and parcel of the Malacha of Zaira, so there's a makam to say to Yerushalmi that it'll be a tolda of separating the spit or the chametz, whatever it may be, Al Yedei, the piece of Baruach. So therefore, there's a markum for the Telda, but it'll be a chiluk ben negam lochshin tzricha legufa. So mele kamem yashem zayin the shaila from Rebbe Kivega. It happens to be that the Gemara on Daf Ayin Gimel Ayin Dalet Amar Aleph tells us a Gevaldikor, and this is a one-liner in the tshuva of the Igros Moshe that I brought in the Marma Kemes. In the tshuva of the Igros Moshe, the shoyl asked him, you want to put forks out on a table, and the forks are mixed up with spoons. So first you want to put out the forks, and then you want to put out the spoons. So the shoyl to Reb Moshe held that when you want the fork, that you don't want the forks, and you want to get the spoon, you want the forks, but you want to get the spoons out. If you would take the spoons out, you would be boirer psoilis mitoich oichel, which itself is a question. But I'm not addressing that right now. We'll leave that for the shiurim on boirer. So the question was how to do it. You want to let the whoever's setting the table do it, and you want to get the fork separated from the spoons. So the shoyel asks Reb Moshe, if I have the whole pile of the silverware and I hold it up and I drop it on the table, and when I drop it on the table, so now they'll be laid out. So now I'll see the forks and I'll see the spoons. So when I drop it, I'm going to be able to take the forks away from the spoons. Before it's all a big mishmash. Now I'll just drop it. If I drop it onto the table, it'll be separated. So Reb Moshe is mitzayin a Gemara in Mesechtes Shabbos Daf Ayin Dalid Amid Aleph. On the bottom of the Amid, the Gemara says, Ki Oser Rav Dimi Omar Shapse de Rav Bibi. It was the Shabbos that Rav Bibi was in charge. The Iklu Reb Ami v'Rav Asi, and he had guests. Shodu Kamayu Kalkolo de Peri. And what happened was he had a fruit that was still had the covering on the fruit. So what he did was Shodu Kamayu. He threw it down. And when he threw it down, then they were able to take the fruit away from separated from the cover. So the covers of the fruit or whatever the not good things were on the fruit, they were able to take it off. So Rav Moshe, throwing down the silverware is toiv ma'od. It's toiv ma'od because it's abaferish Gemara. The Gemara says it was shoda kamayu and he threw it down. So Rav Moshe condones this din of throwing it down onto the table. I saw in the Sefer Ayil Meshulish brought in the name of Rabbi Yashiv Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha that he wasn't so happy with this, that you're allowed to throw it down. It's not explained there so carefully why, but he's mitzayin in that Sefer Ayil Meshulish that Rashi on Shodu Kamayu, Rashi says, Loi rotzo livro ha'oichel mitoich ha'olin, v'losis lifnei kol echad ve'el ela shotchon. He pushed it out. He changes the Lashon Rashi from shoda, that he dropped it, to shotchon, that he spread it. That he wasn't maskim. What is Rashi saying? Why is it so important to say he pushed it out onto the table instead of throwing it down? So I want to say a davar mechudish ad ma'od. We want to be, let's say, I don't know in the Gemara itself, but let's say you hold like the Yerushalmi. And according to the Yerushalmi, when somebody spits into the wind, it's not pseilis mitoich eichel. It's pseilis and pseilis, or eichel and eichel. The malacha is not pseilis mitoich eichel. The malacha is the separation through the wind. If someone would throw the forks and spoons into the wind, and the hurricane of the wind would separate the spoons and forks, l'chayra lefidi Yerushalmi, that would be zaira. Because why would that be zaira? The wind is doing it. If you would do it with your hands, that would be oichel v'oichel. If you're doing it through the zaira in the wind is mechudish a new halacha, and it's a halacha of zaira. So when you use the wind, you are actually entering into a new parsha, a new ballpark. And that ballpark is called Zoyre. That ballpark is not called Boirer, and then it'll be Osir. What does Reb Moshe gain in the Igros Moshe of throwing it down? Okay, there's no Boirer, because I'm not doing anything. I'm just letting it separate. I'm not making a separation. Throwing it down is Zoyre. What's the difference if it's wind or if it's gravity? The gravity is pulling it down. If I would throw it down, maybe it's true. Throwing it down is me doing it. So that would be one halacha, but that would be boirer. So therefore we're saying for some reason that wouldn't be boirer. But al kulpanim, let it be zayre. Because if I drop it down, it should be called zayre. Sure that he dropped it. So the nature of the earth is creating this separation. So if the nature is creating the separation, Lefidi Yerushalmi, it'll be awesome. Maybe that's why Rashi says, Shotchon. He rolled it out. Rolling it out is keeping it in the Baira world. If you're keeping it in the Boirer world, so then there wouldn't be the halacha. You wouldn't have the halacha of Boirer mitoich oichel. You wouldn't have the halacha of Boirer, and you wouldn't have the halacha of Zaira. In case we're entering a whole new question. When does the rule of Zaira? How close is Zaira? Does it have to be Lefi the Yerushalmi or Lefi, not even the Yerushalmi, even without the Yerushalmi? When you make a Boirer al Yedei blowing or al Yedei throwing, or in different ways of using nature, is blowing on it, doing it yourself, and then it's a halacha of Boirer? Or is it a halacha of Ruach and it would enter the halacha of Zaira? So therefore, that's why it would be that halacha. It would be that halacha of Zaira Beruach Mesayasa, and therefore there would be that halacha. As we mentioned before from the Nishmas Adam, that the Nishmas Adam says the Minchas, and it's in the Minchas Chinuch in the Meisach HaShabbos. The Minchas Chinuch says Zaira Beruach Mesayasa needs a pitchfork, a resech, because that was the Tzura Malach. If you see in any of the pictures of the picture books about the Lamates Malach, Zaira is you pick it up with a pitchfork. So that's the malacha. The malacha is picking it up and using a kli. Anytime you don't use a kli, and even if you use the wind, then the halacha would be, it would be a halacha of Boirer, and would have the coolest or the chumras of Boirer. Azoy steht im Chinuch, or azoy steht in Nishmas Adam. So the Nishmas Adam im Kain, what's the pshat in the Yerushalmi? The Yerushalmi says if you throw it out, if you spit out the window, it turns into a Zaira. There's no pitchfork. It's you're spitting out. The feed varenu that we said before, it's very miyushim. That din of the pitchfork is in the Av of Zaira. The Tolda of Zaira is the utilizing the wind. That is what tells it to the Av. So in Cain, if that's what tells it to the Av, so then there would be that halacha. There would be this halacha, this just to finish off, and I would take the liberty to make a hagdome to the inyan of Boirer, and we'll just finish off with that shaila. Then we'll just say something on something else. What is the inyan of Boirer, where it comes really halacha? When somebody finds a bug in his soup. So if you want to remove the soup, that's pselis, that's eichel miteich pselis. If you want to take the bug out, so then it's pseila, it's going to have to do with what we said before, and then it's pselis miteich eichel, and you're not allowed to take that out. In Turei Zav in Hilchos Shabbos, and it's quoted by the Mishnah, says that the eitzah to take it out is take a spoon and take the bug out with some soup. So then the halach is you're not over the isser of Boirer midaraisa. So therefore you're not over the isser of Boirer, and therefore you're allowed to. The Mishnah Berurah says the reason you're allowed to is because you're not taking psoilis. You're taking out psoilis and oichel from the soup because there's other soup around the bug. If you would take the bug out, stick your fingers in and pluck the bug out, that would be pselis mitoich oichel. But if you take the bug together with the soup, so then the halacha would be oichel and pselis. So the Mishnah Berurah doesn't need the halacha from Boirer. The Chazon Ish argues on the Mishnah Berurah. Uncharacteristically, you could look it up in the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish sagt an anderes Svare. So the Chazon Ish, when I take it out, it's not only because I'm not taking psoilis and mitoich oichel. It's only a psoilis. It's only a psoilis to the oichel that's next to it. It's not a psoilis and oichel. You need taruvis to make psoilis and oichel. Boirer, by definition, is when it's mu'uriv, the psoilis and the oichel. Dumya to Zaira, that the chaff is on the kernel, it's all together. When you take the pebbles out of the kernels, or you take the chaff off the kernels, that is through the wind, that's psoilis mitoich oichel. So the Chazon Ish, if they're separated anyway, then even though it bothers me Das ist nicht kein Pselis mitech Eichel. Sagt the Chazon Ish, if I'm taking it out, I'm taking out Pselis. But I'm taking out the whole Taruvis. Because that Taruvis is the pug together with the soup next to it. So the pug together, I'm not doing even a Maisa, just I'm taking it out together with Eichel. I'm taking out the Taruvis. It's only Mu'uriv with what's next to it. If it's what's Mu'uriv, what's next to it, so I'm taking that whole Taruvis out. So the Chazon Ish, therefore, you would not have this halacha. There's nafkaminas ladin in this lamdis. Abazi zok the Chazon Ish. I think the Yesod HaDvarim is, maybe back to it originally, that the Mishnah Brura held that the malacha is Maisa taking out psoilis mitoich oichel. So when you take out psoilis mitoich oichel, if you take it out with some oichel, that's okay, because I didn't do a Maisa of taking psoilis mitoich oichel. According to the it got psoilis mitoich oichel. So if it's psoilis mitoich oichel, so then therefore, as long as the psoilis is separated from the oichel, that would be sufficient. I just saw from Avram Ganachowski's I saw in a kuntris. He says maybe according to the Chazon Ish, that's the pshat in the Gemara which shifted the Rav Idi over here when he rolled it out and he did it. Why wasn't he over boirer? Because what he did was he now made it instead of one taruvis. Now the oichel and the psoilis were really separate. So since they were already separate, so then you're allowed to take the oichel out of the psoilis, and therefore Dr. Bavram Ganachowski, that would be a pshat in the Gemara. Just fair right. So it's gewaldig to be bayre psoilis mitoich oichel. When we're learning Torah, we're being bayre the psoilis mitoich oichel, and we're being taking out the psoilis. We're finding the neshama of everything. I just want to fair ice with one ha'ara. With one ha'ara, I think I might have said it a while ago. It's going to be in a parish, in Parashas Toldos. I said it over in Yeshiva, and I think it's a very, very important nakuda for our times now to talk this over. We know the pasuk says that when Esav was getting ready to kill Yaakov Avinu, after Yaakov Avinu took the brachas from Esav, so Yaakov of Esav was very agitated. And he said, I'm going to kill Yaakov Avinu. I'm going to kill Yaakov Avinu and bimei Evel Avi. Parsha Pshat, he said he's going to come back and kill Yaakov Avinu in the time of after Yitzchak Avinu passed away. Because we know Esav was a Gevaldike Mitzuyin in the mitzvah of Kibbutz Av, so he didn't want to give any pain to his father. So Yosef said Me'evel Avi, the Klei Yakar explains. But then it seems to be that Bimei Evel Avi seems to be extra verbiage, because he should have said, when my father passes away, why did he stress the Bimei Evel Avi? Zok the Klei Yakar. The Gemara says in Masechtas Shabbos, Daf Lamed Daled, or Lamed Beis, that David HaMelech knew that the Malach HaMavis was going to get him on Shabbos. He knew that b'nevuah. So every Shabbos he was like Posik Pume Me Girsa. He didn't stop learning, because when you're learning, the Torah of learning is Megino Matzle, protects you. Zokt the Klei Yakar. Yaakov Avinu had that secret, and Esav knew it too. And he knew that if Yaakov Avinu would be able to protect himself from Esav through learning Torah, and he wouldn't be able to touch him, he wouldn't be able to hurt him. But he knew a secret. Avol is Aser b'Talmud Torah. And if an Avol is Aser b'Talmud Torah, at that time he'd have his window of opportunity. When Yaakov Avinu is learning Bimei Evel, won't be able to learn Bimei Evel Avi, that would give Esav his window of opportunity, and he'd be able to hurt and damage Yaakov Avinu. So the Klei Yakar, that's what Esav said, Bimei Evel Avi. In the Sefer Derech Sicha, they asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, L'chayra, an Avol is mutter b'Talmud Torah, b'dvarim Oroy. He's allowed to learn Hilchos Havelos. He's allowed to learn Masechta Moed Katan. He's allowed to learn Yirmiyah. So then why would the halacha be me'evel avi? Yaakov Avinu would have learned Dvarim Harayim. Zok Maran Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita. Because Dvarim Harayim, you're Makayim Talmud Torah. But he's Machadish, a Gevaldige Chiddush. An Oval is not Mechuyev in Talmud. And only the Torah of Chiyuv has Megino Matzah. The Torah that's voluntary does not have the Megino Matzah. In the Beis Yisrael from the Gerer Rebbe, Parshas told us, this question is also asked on the Klei Yaakov. What's the Pshat Bimei Evel Avi, that Ovel's Asa B'Talmud Torah won't have Torah Megino Matzah? He could learn Dvarim Harayim. And the Beis Yisrael, the Gerer Rebbe answered, and he said, because an Ovel's Torah is not Mitoch Simcha. The reason it's mutter is because it's Dvarim Harayim and you don't have Simcha. And the Torah of Megino Matzah is the Torah Mitoch Simcha. And a Torah Mitoch Simcha is Megino Matzah. A Torah not Mitoch Simcha is not. And that was the secret at Esau. In simple reading, it seems that these two Terutzim from a Rebbe and from Lahavdil Ben Chaim, Mornon Reb Chaim Kanievsky seem to be polar opposites. The polar opposites would be the Beis Yisrael says Simcha, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky says Chiyuv. We always define and we relate Simcha with what we want to do, not with what we have to do. When we go on a vacation, we think we feel Simcha. When we have to be doing what we have to do, and we have to go through the regular parts of life, we don't feel Simcha because we feel we're responsible. We have to do it. So it seems like two separate things. The truth is, it's Punktfakert. When a Yid learns Torah mitoich hechrich, when a Yid learns Torah because he feels he can't live without it, when a Yid learns Torah because he knows he's achroi and it's up to him to learn the Torah, that gives the biggest simcha. That's the simcha because we're connecting with the Ratzon Hashem. Every time we do the Ratzon Hashem, that infuses us with a hecher simcha. That infuses us with a fulfillment and a connection that we're plugged into the chayis. We're plugged into the real chiyus. And therefore, that's why it's not a stira, the opposite. It's a Torah mitoich simcha. It's the Simchas HaTorah of the Kof Alei Yamar Kegigas. It's the Simchas HaTorah of the living, the Simchas HaTorah of what's mukhrach, of what we have to do. And when we do that, and we have this Gewaldige Simcha, that's what gives us this Simchas HaChayim. That's what gives us the Torah Megino Matzlah, the Torah that we're learning with a Yegiyah, with extra attention, we're putting our whole minds to it. That's a gewaldige simcha. Just verois, I saw that Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky had a cherished letter, and the letter was written to him that Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita once wrote him a letter, and he wrote Yedidi Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky Shlita, and he wrote him a letter about something. He used to cherish this letter and hold it in a special drawer, because Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita called him Yedidi. There were many years later, he called over his son, Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky, and he said to him, you could take this letter, give it to one of the children. He asked his father, I don't understand, this was such a cherished letter to you, it was so special. He said, no, I was davening this morning, and I read in the davening, I was saying, V'yedidim hevarto, that the Eibishter said on Klal Yisrael, Yedidim hevarto. So Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky said, I upped it up. I'm not only a Yedid with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I'm a Yedid with the Eibishter. The Eibishter zogt of Klal Yisrael, Yedidim hevarto. So he said, therefore, you can give the letter to somebody else. I'm very fulfilled now. Ich bin a Yedid mit the Eibishter. Yedid nefesh of Rachman. The Eibishter is b'Yedidus. He's an of Rachman. There's a relationship of Av. There's a relationship of Melech. And there's a relationship of Yedid. That was Paul Zain to the Eibishter. We should all together. The Eibishter should be shomer us. The Eibishter should give nechama. The Eibishter should give refuah. He should give shmira to anybody that we have. We should all be zeicha bez Hashem together to keep. And thank you very much. Shlomo Goddess keeps giving me this opportunity to be able to be makasha myself with such a tzibur of b'nei Torah, a tzibur of amelei haTorah, and that should be a schus for all of us, a schus for the Megadismen, schus for all the ma'arganim. We should all be zeichem. It's Hashem Tapsuras type as Yeshua's.